Understanding the powers behind the Epstein scandals. We know that the Epstein files have finally been released, at least a few million documents. There's apparently another 1.5 million to come, and who knows how many thousands of hours of video footage, but there's a start. And this has led a whole lot of people to spend the last week trying to find out what's in there. And there's a whole lot of surprises. This is going to be a two-part series. I can only start this week and we'll finish next week, but let me say it's shocking, and it involves Cape Town, Ukraine, a whole lot of other parts that might surprise people. And some of the most prominent names, like the head of the CIA, Goldman Sachs top lawyer, editors of major publications, owners of some of the biggest corporations and sports teams, big Hollywood stars, producers. It's extraordinary. And I mean, you immediately recognize people like Alec Baldwin and Ralph Fiennes, Hollywood stars, Kevin Spacey, who's even got a Cape Town connection, that. But huge amounts, Mick Jagger, I mean, goodness me, who's not there? And, of course, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey has a special place in the Epstein saga, and she's also been involved with human trafficking to Epstein's farm. Just look at this picture. Can you see how Oprah is holding this girl's arm in such a way that it locks her into position? We actually learn that sort of thing in security situations, how to control a person. Look at the fear on this girl's eyes. And there's Harvey Weinstein, good evening, one of the top sleaze buckets on the planet, Hollywood producer, convicted rapist, abuser, and so on. But Oprah Winfrey's plainly present this young girl who's in terror, and she's holding her in such a way that she's restrained. That's a restraining hold. I don't know what you see there, but I just think this is so dark, what's going on there. And Harvey Weinstein and Oprah Winfrey plainly like one another. And it's plain there's a lot of key people, from presidents like Bill Clinton, senators like George Mitchell, princes like the ex-Prince Andrew, now known just as Andrew Windsor, and Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's believed to have been his controller. Very, very dangerous kind of characters. Alan Dershowitz, a lawyer. You know, 98% of lawyers give the rest a bad name. Kevin Spacey, who's a very well-known popular Hollywood star. And then Les Wexner, I should say. He's meant to be head of Victoria's Secret and a bundle of other fashion kind of stores. And Jeffrey Epstein often represents himself as he is talent scouting for Victoria's Secret, and that's one of his covers. And he's got a close relationship with Les Wexner, so that's pretty. Now, of course, we all know about Ghislaine Maxwell, but the model agency boss, Jean-Luc Brunel, was recruiting girls from Paris and shipping them across to Ghislaine Maxwell and to Jeffrey Epstein. Well over 1,000 young people trafficked through his island. And then there's the British ambassador to America, Peter Mendelsohn, many calling him Mandy. So you've got Andy, or Randy Andy, and you've got Mandy in Britain. And interesting, the only people who've ever been imprisoned for Epstein's crimes are British citizens. No Americans, just somehow, because Ghislaine Maxwell was, of course, a British citizen, still is. So this character, Epstein's best pal, Mandy, as they call him, and he was at one time head of commerce in Britain, and he gave all kinds of tips that enabled Epstein to make millions more because of insider trading, which is completely illegal. And all of this is, interestingly, not just leading to his resignation, sacking from everything in Britain, but the British Prime Minister, Kevin Starmer, who we don't need to feel sorry for, he's a bad man, is facing losing his position as well. And here's this British ambassador to America on Jeffrey Epstein's island and enjoying all kinds of opportunities with Jeffrey on his island. So plainly, this Mendelsohn, or this British ambassador, has definitely disgraced this country. And Britain is so distraught over this. This is going to topple the present government in Britain probably, because they are so, it's amazing how many scandalous characters there are in American politics, but I don't know if any of them have fallen. But the British are taking this more seriously probably than the Americans. And yeah, Britain's stronger in Europe. This guy was a strong stay in Brexit character. And obviously a close pal of Keir Starmer, who's regretting the day he ever met him. Interestingly, evidence has now come out from these dumped files that a major funder of AI was Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, he doesn't have the intelligence to have done any of the innovations, but he's put a lot of the money up for it, or he's found the money. So he's been a major funder of AI, and the goal, according to those who know what he is up to, is that people could be tracked. He was selling and buying girls, underage girls, online. And it's now been proven, the whole efforts where they can see that Alter AI has got the benefit that they can use it for sexual exploitation too. And we've got a scandal right now in Pinelands High School in Cape Town, where a whole lot of people have had themselves posted online as posing naked, whereas they never have. This is somebody who's used some AI grok or whatever in order to humiliate some of their fellow students at school. I don't know if they found the person yet, but I mean, that's a crime. Some of the biggest leaders in tech, Google and so on, friends of Jeffrey Epstein, frequent flyers on his Lolita Express, regularly visitors to his pedo island. And what was Jeffrey Epstein involved in? It's very clear. He was doing sexual blackmail, human trafficking, and he was working for intelligence agencies. He plainly was getting people into compromising situations, attracting some of the most influential people around the world, giving them what's totally illegal and to their wicked heart's delight. And then he had cameras in every room, and he's able to blackmail them and sell that blackmail information to the highest bidder to be able to control those people's votes, policies, and so on. Now, interestingly, one of the characters in this, one of his close friends was Naomi Campbell, apparently what they call a supermodel. Now, the intriguing thing with us is she came out here as a guest of Nelson Mandela when Mandela was president. So we're talking about back in the 90s. And interestingly, they also had Charles Taylor as a guest at the president's mansion here in Cape Town. They had a party. And at the end of this party, Charles Taylor was the dictator. He is an American-born, mass-murdering, blood diamond thug in Liberia, which is America's one colony in Africa. They carved out Liberia to be a place to send freed slaves. And the capital is Monrovia, named after President Monroe. And Charles Taylor was part of an American Negro colonization of Liberia, where they had a constitution where only Negroes of American descent could vote or be in any kind of government leadership, and African-born Liberians had no rights. And he was getting people's hands chopped off for daring to vote for the opposition and having people tortured and so on, extracting his blood diamonds. He's the ultimate classic blood diamond leader. So Naomi Campbell was compelled to give testimony at the International Court of Justice, ICJ. And she says at the end of this party in Cape Town with President Mandela, Charles Taylor gave her a small pouch of uncut diamonds. Obviously blood diamonds. Now this, by the way, in South Africa is about the worst crime imaginable. In South Africa, worse than murder, tax evasion, or treason is dealing in uncut diamonds. Every uncut diamond in South Africa belongs to De Beers by law. That's true for Botswana, that's true for Namibia, it's true for South Africa. You will get a worse sentence for uncut diamond dealing in South Africa than you will for murder, serial murder, rape, treason, even worse than tax evasion. I mean, it's absolutely the worst crime in this country. It shows you who runs the country. And that was true in old South Africa, and it's true in new South Africa. Uncut diamonds is streng verboden onder geen omstandigheden, don't even think about it, is jy mal. So she testifies, Charles Taylor gave her a bag of uncut diamonds. And she gave it to Nelson Mandela as a donation for his Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Now, this was testified at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Does anyone remember the scandal in the newspaper? I don't. Just didn't make the news because Nelson Mandela took a bag of uncut diamonds and didn't report it. Didn't go to the police. It's not recorded in the books of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Now, I mean, what are we saying? Well, we're not saying anything, just saying what Naomi Campbell reported, but isn't that extraordinary? And this is a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Naomi Campbell, but it affects South Africa. Of course, Zuma is in the Epstein file as well. President Jacob Zuma went to London for some reason, and Epstein organized a supper and girls for entertainment for President Zuma. Ramaphosa is also in the Epstein files, same sort of thing. And apparently Kabila, the dictator of Congo, is also in the Epstein files. He was very obsessed with scientists. He made a lot of friends among scientists. And of course, some of the most famous evolutionists. He put a lot of his money into funding the promotion of evolution universities and pushing of AI. But what's also intriguing is some things have come out that when they look for lost girls, there's a whole lot of lost girls who are missing. And then on this online sales place where you can buy things online, there were furniture cabinets with mysteriously the names of whatever girl was missing for like $14,000, $16,000, $19,000. Very overpriced for some furniture cabinet, but anyway, and always tied date-wise. And it's like this Pizzagate thing. It looks like they were literally selling people online. There's a whole lot of things that he is involved in of actually selling young people online. Now, he was such a good friend with Bill Clinton. Jeffrey Epstein visited Bill Clinton at the White House 17 times. I don't know if anyone else here has been to the White House 17 times, but that seems to me like frequent flyer kind of level. Now, there's a book out called One Nation Under Blackmail, the sordid union between intelligence and organized crime that gave rise to Jeffrey Epstein. Where did Jeffrey Epstein get all his money from? He never had a college degree, but he became a maths teacher in an exclusive school without even having a college degree, which is bizarre. But he made a lot of money, and he is involved with some Ponzi scheme with a company which went bankrupt, and he testified against the owner of the company, although he probably did a lot of the Ponzi scheme himself and kept himself out of jail. There's a whole lot of books out on him: Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story, The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein, and in Filthy Rich, the Jeffrey Epstein story. From a more constructive point of view, to understand this is what Jim Caviezel starred in, and Mira Sorvino, exposing the human trafficking industry's Sound of Freedom. And one of the executive producers and funders of this film was Mel Gibson. Now, interestingly, when he was being interviewed for the job of Labor Secretary, the former US Attorney Alexander Costa said he had cut the non-prosecution deal with Epstein because he'd been told to back off because Epstein was above his pay grade. And he said, I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. So he had a whole lot of eyewitnesses. They had cases, a whole lot of girls who'd been trafficked, abused, raped, and testimonies. And the police investigated and even had photographs. They had a lot of evidence. And they cut a sweetheart deal where Epstein didn't go to prison. He stayed in some really special kind of place attached to the sheriff's office with, double bed and flat screen TV and his own catered food brought in. And he's allowed to go walking all the way around town for exercise. He is allowed to travel to work during the daytime. He's allowed to have girlfriends come in at night, even use some of the sheriffs as his traffickers to go and collect these girls and bring them to him. So it was a sweetheart deal, and they called it that he spent 18 months in prison. In fact, he didn't even spend 13 months in this special arrangement where he basically was under a kind of house arrest, but not really. You see this painting, it's kind of intriguing. This is in Epstein's New York residence, and it's a painting of Bill Clinton in the famous or notorious Monica Lewinsky dress and high heels. Now, what can this communicate? Like, I control the president. It's showing the president, and I don't think Bill Clinton would have wanted this painting up or anyone to see it. But that's the kind of relationship Epstein had with the president. And the president's pictured with girls obviously underage. And one of the quotes from Ghislaine Maxwell and Virginia Roberts was, Clinton liked them young, which probably means illegal. So some people calling him the pedophile president, and Virginia Roberts, who became Virginia Dufresne, who died by suicide, if you believe that, just recently. Personally, I have trouble believing most suicides like that. When I hear of a famous person accusing famous people of suicide, I assume they've been suicided. What was called Arkansided when Clinton was governor of Arkansas. And so, absolutely shocking. And this is on Air Force One, and plainly, you see Jeffrey Epstein's on Air Force One with the president. And you can kind of see his expression, I've got them, I control them. So this also being a real embarrassment for Bill Clinton. Anyone heard of Richard Branson? Yeah. One of the richest people in Britain, Virgin Airlines. Well, he is on a Virgin Island, and plainly an underage girl behind being blacked out, that's part of the redactions. And Branson has written a book called Finding My Virginity, which must be a big joke for him because I don't think he ever knew what that was. Bill Gates is probably the worst of the whole lot in terms of depth. He might have the platinum gold card, frequent flyer record for Peter Airlines, Lolita Express. And of course, he says, no, it was just business transactions. He never saw any girls. He never touched any girls. He never did anything illegal, if you believe him. But remember, Bill Gates is also the COVID king. He's the vaccine man. Remember, Bill Gates gave a TED talk where he said we need to bring the world's population down. And then he said we need to vaccinate everyone. Now, are vaccinations to extend your life and to save your life? If so, it's a contradiction to his goal, which is to depopulate the world. He's on record saying the world should be no more than 500 million population. By the way, we've got 9 billion people in the world right now. So that means there's about 8 to 8.5 billion surplus population in the world. So do you think that this eugenicist who wants to lower the world's population is giving us vaccines to extend our life expectancy and our health? He once said, Bill Gates is on record saying, vaccines are the best investment ever made. Where else in the world can you get a 10-fold return on your investment? 10-fold return? That's 1,000% return. What legitimate occupation gives you 1,000% profit? By the way, his wife, Melinda, who's a co-conspirator in a lot of what he did, especially in vaccines, but she resigned from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and she divorced him back in 2019. And she said because of his close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, then, I don't know if you know and recognize this man, but this is Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak was Prime Minister of Israel at one time and believed to be the handler for Jeffrey Epstein, that he got him into intelligence, probably gave him his first few $100 million to get him going in his blackmail honeypot treatments. Now, Ehud Barak is, I think, considered an opponent or a competitor to Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu would be on the other side politically, and Ehud Barak would be his opposition. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein, good pals, and a whole lot of other famous characters like Kevin Spacey, Hollywood characters. And these are all people who've been frequent flyers on Jeffrey Epstein's flights. And you can see the Woody Allens and the Tom Hanks, and of course, Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg must be a major pedophile. The testimonies on him are shocking. Did anyone here ever see the Poltergeist film? Apparently, there's a sweet, cute little girl who's being terrified, and he raped her so much she died of being over-raped. And that's apparently common in Hollywood. But you can see a whole lot of people here are pretty famous, and they should be notorious. The deep state and Jeffrey Epstein were in bed with one another, literally. Now, interestingly, Bill Gates flew with Jeffrey Epstein on the Elite Express, even after he'd been arrested for child sex trafficking and for being put on a sex offender watch list. And Bill Gates repeatedly met with Jeffrey Epstein, even after he's convicted of these sexual crimes, of procuring underage prostitutes and so on, which is actually also not even true. It wasn't that he procured underage prostitutes. He trafficked young girls and raped them. That's not consensual. 14-year-olds even. So the amount of people that were involved with of Jeffrey Epstein. And I like this quote here from Bill Clinton saying, but who's Jeffrey Epstein, the one with all the money and the convicted pedophile friend of Prince Andrew? I was never a close friend of him. Now that he's got caught, I've never met him. But the links, the amount of important people, right down to royal houses in Europe, apparently there's a princess in Norway. There's quite a lot of weird characters all over the place that he's got contact with, all the way down to Cape Town, South Africa. Now, his close associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, is probably the brains of the outfit. Quite a few of the young girls who were victims of Jeffrey Epstein said, Jeffrey Epstein was not very intelligent, he's not well read, he didn't know that much. They're pretty sure that he wasn't the brains. They said they were more afraid of Ghislaine Maxwell. She seemed to be, she is intelligent, well-spoken, well-read, and she plainly knew what's going on. And she's the one who procured them. Virginia Roberts said she was walking down the street in Palm Beach, and Ghislaine Maxwell stopped her car, spotted her on the road, and had the driver turn around and to try and recruit her. You know, I could get a good job for you and this and another, some important. And because she spoke with a British accent and was obviously intelligent, Virginia Roberts said she immediately trusted her. And that's how she recruited quite a few people. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell's the youngest daughter of Robert Maxwell. Anyone here know who Robert Maxwell was? So Robert Maxwell was a super spy. He's known as Israel's super spy. That's actually the name of a book he's involved in. He's a big-time, major media mogul in Britain. Robert Maxwell, Israel's super spy, the life and murder of a media mogul. Now, he got himself to the top of the media outlets in Britain. You can see here, Maxwell buys the Mirror, and that's just one of the things he did. He at one time stole about 500 million pounds of British people's pension money with a real pension scam. A terrible lowlife. Apparently he's a harsh, brutal, sadistic father, and Ghislaine was his youngest and his most popular. Now, he disappeared off the edge of his boat in the Atlantic, body washed up somewhere in Spain or Portugal, and it was brought back in high honor to Israel. And the president, prime minister, the whole cabinet of Israel was out there. He got buried in the Mount of Olives cemetery, which is for the best of the best heroes. So he might have been a spy and a traitor to Britain, but he was acknowledged by Israel. He's our man, even though they probably killed him. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a fact. Epstein, dead men tell no tales. So Robert Maxwell was intelligence, and he groomed his daughter to be someone who could get important information and control people. And so she probably was the handler for Jeffrey Epstein after Ehud Barak was no longer in power. So it's believed that Maxwell was under investigation for war crimes, believed that he worked for Mossad, and certainly Israel has accepted him as a hero of theirs. But now his daughter became the right-hand person for Jeffrey Epstein. There's a whole lot exposed in this about Shadowland, from Jeffrey Epstein to the Clintons, from Obama and Biden to the occult elite, exposing the deep state actors at war with Christianity, at war with Donald Trump and America's destiny. That's quite a subtitle. Has anyone here heard of Pizzagate? Now, Pizzagate dates back about 10, 11 years. Somebody noticed bizarre things on the internet, people ordering pizza, and particularly pizza and grape soda. And it looked a bit strange, like, I need half an hour, this kind of pizza, and then, cheese. And it sounded like code. And people worked out that it must have something to do with child sex trafficking. This is in Washington, D.C. But then the media, of course, all around scorned this. This is ridiculous. This is not possible. This is conspiracy theories. This is right-wing extremism. And then, on cue, a man comes into the pizza place, I think it was called the Comet, which is meant to be one of the places this was going on. And he shot the place up, didn't hit anyone, but he happened to destroy the hard drive of the computer, which had probably all the records. Gets arrested, they make a big thing. And by the way, the dump of information from the Department of Justice early this week has revealed that Pizzagate was real. There's so much communication. There's over 1,000 references in Jeffrey Epstein's communication with pizza. For example, he has his urologist or something prescribe him some Viagra version to deal with erectile dysfunction, and the doctor's prescription is, after you've taken it, wash your hands and go out and get some pizza and grape soda. And I'll join you for it, basically. So very bizarre. And there's a whole lot of, really enjoyed that pizza, and there's all kinds of details, which is, enjoyed the hunt and the pizza. And why is there so much reference to pizza and grape soda in the Epstein files? It seems that those who dismissed if you go on to Wikipedia, which is where you find out what the deep state globalists want you to believe, they tell you that Pizzagate was a fraud and it was a conspiracy theory. But now it's come up again in the Epstein files. By the way, the American president, Vladimir Putin, said earlier this week that the West is run by pedophiles who worship Satan. Well, in fact, he's pointed out before that there's entire political parties in the West that just exist to legalize pedophilia. That's not much of an exaggeration. It was noted a while ago by Vladimir Putin that the West wages war on countries that refuse to have a gay pride march. And by the way, he's not the only one who said it. The Patriarch Cyril, he's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, also said from Christ Cathedral that the war in Ukraine is all about gay pride, LGBTQ rights. And that's objectively true, because America put $6 billion into overthrowing the elected government in Ukraine, bought up whole radio, TV places, got a comedian to become the new president in Zelensky, who's now got the most corrupt country in Europe, without a shadow of a doubt. And the biggest human trafficking place is now Ukraine. And we know that. Because in Cape Town, we had the House of Rasputin, where the girls all had been trafficked from Ukraine. And our Christian Action was part of drawing it to the attention of our local vice squad. Taryn noticed at Silwood Shopping Centre just down the road, there's a House of Rasputin combi van, and there's some big-looking muscular pimps who were shepherding some foreign girls, obviously didn't speak our local languages, through there to get some of their purchases. And these girls were plainly all from Ukraine. And when our vice squad under J.P. Smith investigated, they found they'd been trafficked, their passports taken away, they'd been promised jobs in Cape Town, hospitality industry models, things like that. They get here, the passport's taken away, they get raped, they're given drugs, they are put into stupors, and they're sold to perverts. So even Cape Town became a place where girls were trafficked. And Putin was confirmed by the head of MI6. The British head of MI6, M, made a statement a while ago that the battle in Ukraine, we must continue to be involved in the war for Ukraine because it's what distinguishes us from dictators like Putin. What defines what the West stands for, our democratic principles, nothing more important than the LGBTQ rights. So the head of MI6 says, we're fighting in Ukraine, we're toppling governments and assassinating people for LGBTQ. And by the way, one of the first things that the Mayan revolutionaries did after they seized power in Ukraine in 2014 was to legalize LGBTQ, which was always illegal in Ukraine before. So maybe the war in Ukraine is primarily over the right of sodomites to abuse kids. And so I don't think Vladimir Putin's wrong when he says the West is being run by Satanists who are pedophiles. Now, these are real pictures. This is not from a film. This is not AI. This is from a Rothschild ball, a gala, a party. And so there's a whole lot of parties that are held by the Rothschilds regularly. I think it's just outside of Paris, where the people wear masks. And some of this has been photographed. Like these are from 1972, which freaked a lot of people out when they saw them. That these are people coming to the Rothschild ball. They have masked balls where people dress up now, and bizarre things on the dining room table. And you wonder, is this edible? What's the purpose? Why would you have baby toys and so on, and then people ripping limbs off and hands and so on? Has anyone heard of the human hunting? Have you heard of Sarajevo safaris? You know that there was a civil war in Yugoslavia, and in Sarajevo, there were thousands of people shot by snipers. Well, it now turns out that Italy's got a major investigation in. It appears that rich tourists, even from Italy, but from around the world, went to Sarajevo where they paid $70,000 to shoot someone, $100,000 if it's to shoot a child. And so, you know, like game trafficking, when you've got canned lion hunting here, somebody pays a fortune, comes from Japan or America, and they shoot some poor retired circus lion from Boswell Wilkie who's now on some farm, and they go home and they reckon they're now a great lion hunter, and they hunt in Africa. Meanwhile, to probably some toothless retired lion from Boswell Wilkie circus. And canned lion hunting is disgusting. This is on the same line. People went to Sarajevo and they paid a fortune to be put into some sniper's nest where they could shoot civilians, sort of like the out there duck hunting or something like that. And apparently some of the people who were trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein said that Jeffrey Epstein used to organize human hunting. They'd send some of these kids, okay, you know, you got a chance to run, and they would be hunted. I mean, literally hunted. Here are some of the older survivors with pictures of them when they were underage and they were being trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein. Probably the most famous is Virginia Roberts, who later married and got the name Guthrie. So Virginia Guthrie apparently committed suicide last year, if you believe that. But she produced the book Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. Personally, I don't think somebody who is publishing books and in the forefront of fighting for justice is going to commit suicide, personally. But most journalists seem to accept without question she committed suicide. But I know that military and intelligence and mercenary types think the best form of assassination is when you can make it look like a suicide. This is how she looked like when she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, interestingly, she's, of course, so famous as being the one who Prince Andrew took particular interest in. Apparently, according to Virginia, it was Jeffrey Epstein himself who took this photograph. She said, my mom will want a picture of this if I met a real live prince. Apparently, Ghislaine Maxwell came into her room that morning and said, your dreams are going to come true. we've got a handsome prince for you to date tonight. And she was abused by him horribly. And there's a whole lot of stories about her. But what's particularly interesting about Virginia Roberts is that she was from a very poor family. She was working as a very low attendant at Mar-a-Lago, which is the big club of Donald Trump. And she was basically taking people's possessions and putting them in lockers and so on. And so when she was walking along the road home, she was spotted by Ghislaine Maxwell, who said she knows a rich man who could really advance her career and all this, that, and the other, and talked her into coming through to Jeffrey Epstein, and then taught her how to please him and how to do this, that, and the other. And she said she never expected to be abused by a woman. She had been brought up to trust a woman, and this was a well-educated, well-spoken, intelligent, obviously cultured woman. And so Ghislaine Maxwell, Virginia said, was even worse to her than Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there's a South African, this is Juliet Bryant. She's a Cape Townian who testifies that in 2002, she was trafficked from Cape Town, from Cape Grace Hotel. So Jeffrey Epstein was visiting Cape Town, staying at the Cape Grace Hotel, and with him was Bill Clinton, who had visited South Africa as president back in 1998, if I remember right. But this is 2002 he's visiting. And there was also Kevin Spacey with him. And not only Kevin Spacey, but is it Chris Rock? Is that the right name? Is this Chris Rock? Or maybe I've got the wrong name, but it's this character from Hollywood was also there. And Bill Clinton spoke at the University of Western Cape. So Juliet Bryant said she went with them to University of Western Cape, and the police were blocking every road so that Clinton and Jeffrey didn't need to stop at traffic lights. It was straight through all the way to University of Western Cape. And then the next day she was told to come and report back to Cape Grace and bring her portfolio, modeling portfolio. And Jeffrey Epstein claimed that he was recruiting for Les Wexner, the Victoria's Secret man. This could be her breaking moment. She thought all her dreams are going to come true. She's going to be an international model, and came from poor family. She's desperate. And so she modeled in the presidential suite in the Cape Grace, and she was the only one doing it. And the only person watching was actually Bill Clinton. But Jeffrey Epstein came in a moment and said, you're just the person we're looking for, and bought her the air ticket to fly through to New York. She gets to New York, and she is producing a diary of an Epstein survivor called Blue Butterfly, but the publisher just pulled out of the deal. They probably got a phone call. Anyway, she wants to bring out her diary at a later stage, but this one's now been cancelled. Now, I'm not finished in that story, though. Let's go back. She was whisked off to New York. She arrives in New York, and she's no sooner arrived than she's told, no, pack a small bag, you're going to the Caribbean. And without any further warning, she is flown in Pedo 1, Lolita Express, down to the Caribbean, to so-called Virgin Islands, or Pedo Island of Jeffrey Epstein. And on the plane, Jeffrey, she said, was putting his hand on her leg and going between her legs without her permission. And she said she knew at that moment, if I say no, they're going to kill me. She said she had such a sense these people are such powerful people and so sinister. She said she had no doubt that her life was worth nothing. She noticed her name was not entered into the flight log. She didn't go through any customs. She didn't go through any security. They just put her on a plane, flew off. She said they could have thrown me out. Nobody would have known anything about it. Nobody even knew where I was. So she produced a diary on that, the abuses she went through, and she's convinced these people are murdering, hunting people, that they're involved in baby farming, that there's some girls who've been used just as incubators for Jeffrey Epstein. So apparently there could be some 15-year-old Jeffrey Epstein's walking around or something right now. But that's a Cape Townian. and all happened here at Cape Grace. So that's intriguing. Jeffrey Epstein, without a college degree, became a maths teacher under this man, Donald Barr, whose son later was the Attorney General, Bill Barr, is it? Under whom he got the sweetheart deal and either escaped from a cell or was hung. But take this as something absolutely bizarre. I mean, this sounds like science fiction. It is science fiction. Donald Barr, the man under whom he got this teaching job, wrote a book called Space Relations, where there's an intergalactic empire ruled by aristocrats. And there's a strategically placed planet called Kozar, not Kazar, Kozar. And it's a human colony settled by the Carlisle Society with 7 nobles ruling the society. And they're so rich and they're so powerful, everyone is bored. And they've got such absolute power that they spend the whole time just enslaving, catching people, space piracy, kidnapping people. And that includes specifically raping a 15-year-old red-headed virgin, notice the red hair, and then getting slaves and having, especially female slaves, and for the women, having male slaves that they sexually abuse, and that there's sadism and there's just unrelenting savagery because the people are bored. They've got so much power, they've got so much influence, and they've got no needs. They're living in such opulence and wealth that they just kidnap and abuse people, and there's no consequences. Now, Donald Barr wrote that book, A Slightly Gothic Interplanetary Tale. Now, that just seems so bizarre, and he was the one who gave Jeffrey Epstein his first leg up, and his son became the Attorney General under whom he escaped justice. I mean, who could write a script like that? I mean, this wouldn't even work as fiction. It just sounds impossible. By the way, Ghislaine Maxwell, his co-conspirator, says she doesn't believe that Epstein committed suicide. He wasn't the kind of person to commit suicide. None of the victims believe he would have committed suicide. He's a megalomaniac. Why would he commit suicide? The brother of Jeffrey Epstein doesn't believe he committed suicide. And there's a whole lot of other people who don't believe he committed suicide either, like Tucker Carlson, for example. Dylan Howard wrote the book Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, Spies, Lies, and Blackmail. That sums it up. Why was all this going on? This is espionage, this is honeypot, this is blackmail material, this is getting some of the most important people in the land, from cabinet ministers, presidents, prime ministers, princes, to do their bidding because they have indulged them, but filmed them breaking the law so that they can then force them to do what they want them to do or vote the way they want them to do. So this is what his cell looked like. And notice, there's no way you can hang yourself in a prison like this. There's nothing to hang from. And they've even got a shower. The shower's even got a timer to prevent flooding. And all the details here. Now, intriguingly, they claim that he hung himself with a noose, which is missing. No one can find it. And in fact, at the time, the people who came there from the prison said that noose is not what he was hung with. So where's the noose he was hung with? And how did he manage to hang himself in a place? You can see the kind of ceiling. There's no place that you can hang anything from. How can you hang yourself from a top bunk? Metropolitan Correctional Center. And there are people in the Epstein files that have just been released testifying who worked there that the night before he's meant to have committed suicide, he was transferred to another facility. So this is not over yet. Also, what's come out, this isn't a conspiracy theory, but in the papers, the prison officials say, and it's in the Department of Justice files, that to confuse the journalists, they made up a dummy body, and the body they put into the white van, morgue van outside, was not Epstein. And that was to get all the journalists to chase the wrong thing. Then it took the real body in a black morgue van out another door. Now that, some people have said the bodies were switched. Now we know the government says we switched the bodies. Well, what's the possibility that they switched the bodies so totally that, in fact, what's the possibility he's even alive today? Interestingly, the only video footage that they've released in these Epstein files shows something in an orange jumpsuit going down the stairs, which the government's trying to say, well, that could be a cleaning lady taking some of the linen down. Except that they've said we never do it on that day at that time of night. It's not possible. And so could it not be Epstein himself going down the stairs? The people don't believe the story either. Here's the kind of things people say, like Jesus willingly died for you, unlike Epstein, who didn't kill himself. It's a joke in America. People talking about, do you believe Epstein killed himself? And nobody believes Epstein killed himself. But that's the official version. But then there's people saying, is Jeffrey Epstein alive today? Living under an assumed identity. Maybe he's had not a facelift, what do you call it when you have a plastic surgery, change your identity? So apparently there was deliberate switching of bodies anyway at the correctional facility. Notice people don't do crimes, they do mistakes, and they need corrections, like, I will not murder and rape, I will not human traffic. Now, he faked his death. Some people think this is part of his escape plan. Is Epstein still back? And what role does Barr have, the son of his first mentor? One nation under blackmail seems more honest than one nation under God. Now, Hollywood producer and sexual predator and rapist Harvey Weinstein, along with Jeffrey Epstein, also shows very much the kind of Sabbatean religion that we'll speak about next week. But deception is pervasive. Everyone will deceive his neighbor and will not speak the truth. They've taught their tongues to speak lies. They weary themselves to commit iniquity. Jeremiah 9 verse 5 seems a good summary of what we're seeing. And of course, Harvey Weinstein, pervert, scumbag. I don't know why people are suddenly surprised to discover he's a rapist, because his films are all sick. A man who puts such filth on a screen, what makes you think that his personal life is any better? But that didn't stop people like Bill Clinton and a whole lot of others loving him. And Hillary Clinton, they looked like great buddies. And Hillary and Harvey again. And Barack Hussein Obama got on very well with these sleaze buckets as well. And a whole lot of stars. In fact, when it came out that Harvey Weinstein was requiring his stars to all let him do whatever he wanted to them first, some people said, that's not rape, that's prostitution. Because none of these women reported that they were abused by Jeffrey Epstein. They took the Oscars, they thanked Harvey Weinstein, they climbed up the ladder of Hollywood, and it was all just known. There were even jokes at the Oscars, and I remember one of the people saying, now that you've got this Oscar, you no longer need to pretend that you like Harvey Weinstein. And there was, and yet these people would stand up, these very people, Gwyneth Paltrow and so on. I want to thank Harvey Weinstein and things like that. So this is just scandalous. By the way, the first person to blow the whistle on Harvey Weinstein was Mia Sorvino, who was also a major campaign against human trafficking. Mia Sorvino was the co-star of Jim Caviezel in the Sound of Freedom film. And she's done quite a lot to fight against human trafficking. But Mia Sorvino blew the whistle, not these Oscar winners. The man who's blown the whistle the most on Hollywood is Mel Gibson. Now, there was a time that Mel Gibson was the most popular male lead in Hollywood. He was doing things like Braveheart, Lethal Weapon, Mad Max was his entry, and he did so many popular films. He got millions. He even got double Oscars, and that was, I think, for the Braveheart film. His first film that I remember seeing him in was Gallipoli, which is a great anti-war movie from Australia. And you can see he really hates the Brits, like in The Patriot. The Patriot, Braveheart, and Gallipoli, the enemy are the British. And I think I was suggesting at one point he should seriously think of looking at the Anglo-Boer War and come down and play a role of Christian de Wet or Delarey. Because, if he wants the British as the enemy, Anglo-Boer War is another good realm that he can look into. But then he committed thought crimes. Hollywood is an institutionalized pedophile ring. It's a den of parasites who feast on the blood of children. Every studio in Hollywood is bought and paid for with the blood of innocent children. Now, do you want to know why he's not so popular? And of course, he was a key producer and funder of Sound of Freedom film, and Hollywood hated the Sound of Freedom film so much. Do you know Disney bought the rights to the film and then sat it for 7 years? They just bought it so that it wouldn't see the light of day. And then it finally came out thanks to Mel Gibson, and Hollywood hated this film. And at the time when I was considering going to see the film, and we screened it here, actually at the Reformation Society too, they said, this propagates the conspiracy theory that they're powerful elites involved in the trafficking and abuse of children. Which is the truth. It's not a conspiracy theory, and it's come out now in the Epstein files. And as we now know, some of the most famous people in America involved in human trafficking. And then also, Mel Gibson points out there's the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, where punishment of these, if you have possession of these documents in Soviet Russia, you could be punished by immediate death under the Soviet Union. Why would that be? Now, if you go on Wikipedia, it says these are fake, but if they are fake, why is it that they're so accurate in depicting how countries fall? This is something the communists have been doing for a while. Next week, I'll show from the Sabbatean Revolution and the Illuminati how really this is what they are. And I see that our dear friends, Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, all the way through Harvey Weinstein, they show all the marks of a Sabbatean, of occultism. They are pedophiles, they are child abusers. By the way, one of the surprises that's come out of the new Epstein files is the last girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein. This is a young girl, well, she's in her 20s, I suppose that makes her old, but Jeffrey Epstein standards. I mean, she's only 30 years younger than him, I think, which makes her ancient. But he left his island, he left his estates, his 5,000-acre estate in New Mexico, his New York apartment, his Paris apartment, worth about $120 million to her, along with a massive ring and apparently every intention he had of marrying her. Of course, he committed suicide. By the way, she's not going to get any of that. And the reason is all the money from his properties, which have been sold, is going to a fund to care for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. This woman was involved. She's from Belarus, and she was involved in trafficking girls. She would go and recruit girls. Apparently, they used girls to recruit girls because they're more likely to trust them. And so she is also doing the job of being a recruiter and human trafficker. If you want to know why Mel Gibson's no longer popular in Hollywood, it's not just the thought crimes and blowing the whistle on a pedophile Satanist running Hollywood, but he produced the best film on the crucifixion of Christ in history. Every single studio in Hollywood, Paramount, MGM, the whole lot, everyone turned him down. Not one studio in Hollywood was willing to take on this project. And Mel Gibson was such a well-known name. He is such a successful actor. He was someone who had brought in the hundreds of millions in some of his films. And yet when he wanted to make a film on the Passion of Christ, they weren't interested. They were super interested in the Last Temptation of Christ film, which was a financial catastrophe, but because it gave the message they wanted, which was blasphemous and pornographic, they supported that. But the Passion of the Christ, by the way, became the most successful film, one of the 10 most successful films of all time, but the most successful film of its year. I think this came out in 2004. And Mel Gibson had such trouble from it because the ADL went berserk and said that this film propagates the falsehood that Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus. Well, the fact is that just is historically and biblically true. Of course, the New Testament was written by Jews who converted to Christ, and the early church was made up overwhelmingly at first of Christians who were Messianic Jews. But because it depicts the role of the Sanhedrin in betraying Christ, the ADL called for people to boycott it. So every single Hollywood-owned cinema in America refused to take the film, which was most of them. None of the studios were willing to market it. None of them were willing to screen it. And then just about every newspaper in America refused to advertise it. Mel Gibson took the entire weight upon himself. He mortgaged his properties. He would have been ruined if this hadn't succeeded. But in fact, it became one of the most successful films ever. And with this, he earned the undying hatred of Hollywood. And so, because he had made these quotes, he was being struck off the books. You weren't allowed to employ Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson went through the wilderness. And interestingly, it took the chap, is it Robert Downey Jr.? Robert Downey Jr., who plays Iron Man, who, by the way, is also a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, but he went to Hollywood at one of these events and said, I call on you to extend the same grace you've shown to me, and Roman Polanski and so many others, by forgiving Mel Gibson. And, what did Mel Gibson have to be forgiven for? But he had spoken the truth. Hollywood worships Satan. This, by the way, is a statue put up in public places in California. I've seen them even in the parks in California. This is not unusual. Notice the children looking up in admiration towards a satanic figure. Well, the fact is, the West is run by Satanists who are involved in pedophilia. While they promise them freedom, they themselves are slaves of depravity. Now, this is just a beginning insights of what I've come across in the Epstein files so far this week. But next week, I want to go through the Sabbatean movement, 1666, and you see the roots, how this goes back centuries. And Epstein may be dead. He might be under false identity. He might have had plastic surgery. We don't know. But you can be sure that what he was involved in hasn't stopped. Because you've got people like that all over the world, and we've had them up there for quite a while. And by the way, it's not unusual to have sexploitation or sexpionage, they call it, where they actually have espionage units just set up as honey traps in order to get people in influential positions and compromising positions so that they can blackmail them and get them to do what they want. The Japanese actually had whole units dedicated to sucking Chinese generals into prostitution dens, getting them onto drugs, and getting information from them, compromising them so that they would weaken the Chinese resistance when Japan was fighting China. That's documented. I mean, that happened. We know the Russians had the Red Sparrow unit where they actually trained agents who would seduce key people targeted in the West, and was done. The Roman Catholic Church even had Jesuits trained. They even had nuns trained to infiltrate Protestant seminaries and to seduce Protestant ministers and to get people into compromising positions. They even had Jesuits who were trained to homosexually compromise people who were that way inclined to be able to blackmail and control them. This has been going on for years, but nobody did it more prominently than Jeffrey Epstein. So he's not the first, he's not the last. And I think when you understand the Sabbatean movement, which we'll get to next week, but this just gives you an idea of what we're talking about. We think we're under the government, but the government is under the United Nations and World Health Organization, as we discovered during the COVID cult, and NATO and so on, but they're all under the banks, and the banks are under the central bank, and above them is the elite Illuminati. And when you talk about the swamp, you think you know about the swamp. Okay, there's disgusting garbage brought up by Hollywood, but in fact, when you go down the rabbit hole, you discover that a lot of what's being produced in Hollywood is being produced on the initiative of the CIA, and the CIA actually has got a whole department to guide certain mainstream films. if anyone's ever seen Top Gun, that was a Ronald Reagan idea. Ronald Reagan said, we need to produce more films in the 80s that engender patriotism. There'd been a whole lot of anti-military films that came out in the 70s. And so Ronald Reagan, who of course had been an actor, now he's president, he said, can we not inspire Hollywood to produce more films that are going to get recruits for the military and get people supporting the military? And so suddenly you had a whole spate of missing in action films with Chuck Norris, and you had Rambo, and Top Gun 1 was a total American naval operation. They funded the whole thing and inspired it to the degree that they could actually have recruiting desks in the cinemas. And I've seen it. When I saw there was Navy SEALs, they also total organized Ronald Reagan idea. That film was a big one in the 80s. They had one of these, was it The Hunt for Red October? I went to see The Hunt for Red October in America and came out into the areas that got outside the cinema, and in the foyer, they had the recruiting desks for the US Navy. I mean, it was that blatant. And people signed up. I mean, it was super inspiring. I suppose if I was a youngster in America at the time, I might have thought of signing up. But I'm infantry, always would have been infantry. Still, they literally have, do anyone here see Maverick, Top Gun 2? This is such a propaganda film. The whole film is about the need to bomb Iran and save the world from a nuclear bomb. It was so timed. And here they get Tom Cruise to play Top Gun 2, and it's specifically bombing these nuclear facility in Iran to prevent them developing a nuclear bomb. So blatantly, this is what they talk about. So much of what comes out from Hollywood is designed by the deep state to prepare people, to condition people to accept things. Did you notice how many films that were coming out about pandemic and things like that before 2020 COVID cult? And so they said that the swamp is how they will organize films in order to precondition you. Sometimes when they need a lot of centralized authority, they suddenly come out with aliens and space invasion, and you're going to be, Independence Day, and there's some aliens are going to invade Earth, so we need to give more power to the United Nations and so on. And this is thought up in the Pentagon, a place like that. And then a lot of environmental fears, like the world's going to be hit by comets, and we're going to have all the oceans covering us, our coastal cities. Cape Town's going to be underwater, so is London and New York and so on. Those films come from, this is the deep state coming up with those ideas. And they speak about false flag terrorism, where so many of the terrorist attacks are actually created by the state. And we've had top MI6 people saying all the terrorist attacks in Britain has been organized by the state. They all are false flags. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm just quoting them. And I've heard of some American characters saying as well, there's not been a single terrorist attack on American soil that wasn't organized by the government. Now, we know about Operation Gladio, 1950s, a false flag attack where NATO conjured up terrorist attacks where they murdered civilians, random terrorist attacks across Europe, bombings, assassinations, hijackings of trains and so on, all organized by Operation Gladio. It was a NATO operation to terrorize the population, to support their governments in having more power, less freedom, because of the threat of terrorism from outside. Meanwhile, it was terrorism organized by their own governments. Italian governments assassinating their own politicians, things like this. France, Spain, happened all over Europe, and it was done by the state. So they point out a whole lot of things, from poisoning the food to drugs that poison us, which Robert F. Kennedy is pointing out right now. Who put mercury and aluminium in vaccinations for kids? And as Donald Trump said, are you crazy? Who puts mercury in a vaccination? And that's what they're doing. And the other poisons in our water and all the other environmental disasters. And it's all state-made. So this is the top of the deep swamp. But when you go below, you suddenly see where it comes from. But if you go further down, you can see, if you go down all the rabbit holes, you see at the bottom, In fact, the world's being run by the Illuminati, by big banking cartels and the Sabbateans, which we'll look at more next week. But the key scripture verse for us is Psalm 94, verse 16. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will take a stand for me against the workers of iniquity? We need to smash cultural Marxism, which is at the core. It's behind all of these creeps. And of course, we always will put our videos on the Frontline YouTube. You can find on www.frontlinemissionsa.org each week. I've got a leaflet here that explains 1666 and the Sabbatean roots of the New World Disorder on a table above the stairs to help yourself to that. And invite friends for next week when we'll go into that in great depth.